It was 6 a.m., the kind of early where the sun is just a suggestion of purple on the horizon, and the coffee is the only thing keeping your soul tethered to your body, when my phone shattered the silence, screaming with a call from Central Dispatch that would change the trajectory of my entire year. "Sir, you are trespassing on private property. You need to vacate the premises immediately." The voice on the other end shrieked, practically vibrating through the receiver, a voice I would come to know as Evelyn St. James, the self-appointed queen of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. She was screaming about her ranch, the 50-acre slice of heaven I'd bought with my life savings to save my brother, Danny, a man who left pieces of himself in the sandbox of Afghanistan and came back with a mind full of broken glass and a Bronze Star that couldn't stop the night terrors. She was demanding I hand over the deed by sunrise because her precious son, Preston, needed my land for a custody battle, using his 3 children as pawns in a game of real estate chess that she thought she had already won, unaware that for months she had been harassing the county sheriff. But before the handcuffs and the headlines, you have to understand why we were there, why this wasn't just dirt and grass to us. My name is Jack Harlan, and for 22 years I've worn the badge, seeing the worst of humanity. But this ranch, Starlight Ridge, was supposed to be the antidote, a place bordered by Oakwood Heights, one of those gated communities where the gates are meant to keep reality out and the average mortgage is higher than a cop's annual salary. I bought Starlight Ridge 5 years ago, not for the investment potential that Evelyn seemed to smell like blood in the water, but because Danny was drowning, spiraling into a darkness that the VA doctors tried to medicate away with pills that just made him numb. And it was only here, amidst the smell of drying hay and the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the cattle, that my little brother started sleeping without screaming, his hands finally steady enough to hold a rein without shaking. Then came Evelyn, blowing into our lives like a nor'easter in Chanel boots, a woman who wielded her HOA presidency like a divine right of kings, driving a pristine white Range Rover that had never seen a speck of mud, convinced that her law degree made her the ruler of the zip code. Her son, Preston, was the catalyst, a 32-year-old man-child recently divorced, fighting for custody of kids he'd ignored until his ex-wife finally grew a spine, and the family court had given him 60 days to prove he could provide a stable environment, which in Preston's warped mind meant he needed to stop living in his mommy's guest wing and acquire a proper estate. They decided Starlight Ridge was that estate, ignoring the fact that it wasn't for sale, ignoring the life Danny and I had built, because in the world of Evelyn St. James, people like us were just background noise, temporary inconveniences to be zoned out of existence. The war started on a Tuesday, subtle at first, just fresh tire tracks cutting a jagged scar through my east pasture, a fence line severed wide enough for livestock to wander onto the highway, which I initially wrote off as teenagers joyriding, fixing it with the sweat of honest labor that felt cleaner than any paperwork I did at the station. But then it happened again that weekend. 3 strands of barbed wire cut with surgical precision, wire cutters slicing clean through, and Danny found it during his morning patrol, standing there trembling, the piece we'd fought so hard to build shattering along with that fence. I felt that cold, familiar weight settle in my chest, the instinct that tells you this isn't an accident, so I did what a cop does. I gathered intel, installing professional-grade, motion-activated trail cameras, the kind that see in the dark and don't blink. The footage was a revelation of entitlement, capturing Preston on a midnight blue ATV, tearing through my property at 2 a.m., weaving between terrified cattle, revving his engine just to watch them run, and then stopping to take photos of my barn, not like a tourist, but like a developer, surveying lines, measuring angles. By the 4th night, he brought a friend, and they were driving stakes into my soil, marking boundaries as if the deed was already signed, breathtaking arrogance that made my blood boil. But instead of storming out there with a shotgun like a lesser man, I let my training take over, building a case file brick by brick. Then came the call that started this story. Wednesday morning, 6:43 a.m., dispatch patching through a 911 call from Evelyn, claiming I was the squatter threatening her son who was simply assessing the land for children's housing needs, a performance so convincing that if I didn't know the truth, I might have believed her. Deputy Cole, a rookie I'd trained myself, showed up at the barn, looking at me with wide eyes, saying, "Sheriff Harlan, we got a weird one. Lady says you're squatting on your own land." And when I showed him the footage of Preston acting like a conquistador on my acreage, Cole's jaw nearly hit the dirt. "You want me to go knock on their door?" Cole asked, hand on his belt, but I shook my head, telling him to wait, because you don't catch a predator by scaring them off. You wait until they're fully committed to the hunt. That afternoon, Evelyn rolled up the driveway, stepping out of her Range Rover in a power suit that cost more than my tractor, adjusting oversized sunglasses as she looked at Danny and me like we were something she'd stepped in. "I'm looking for the owner. Are you the help?" she asked, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that masks pure venom. And when I told her I was Jack Harlan and this was my land, she didn't miss a beat, launching into a speech about how her son needed this property for the welfare of his children, and she was prepared to make a generous offer. "Everything has a price, Mr. Harlan," she smiled, a shark showing teeth. "Perhaps you don't understand the legal complexities." And right then, looking at her dismissive sneer, I knew we weren't just neighbors having a dispute. We were at war. The legal complexities arrived the next Tuesday via a process server who looked apologetic, handing me a motion from the family court of Fairview County, Preston St. James versus Thomas Harlan, a document claiming my refusal to sell was an impediment to suitable housing for minor children. A masterpiece of fiction that framed my ranch as the only possible location that could satisfy the court's requirements for Preston's custody. She was using those kids as human shields, weaponizing their welfare to force a sale, betting that no judge would want to be the villain who denied children a home. But she underestimated the radar judges have for manipulation. When the court-ordered appraiser, Sarah Jenkins, arrived on Thursday, walking the property line with me, she seemed confused, noting that usually custody housing requirements are flexible, asking why this specific 50 acres was so essential. And when I showed her the tablet with the footage of Preston trespassing, her professional mask slipped into genuine alarm. Sarah knew, just like I did, that this wasn't about kids, and her report reflected that, documenting not just the value of the land but the adverse possession behavior, the harassment, the unauthorized access, a report that should have stopped them cold. But Evelyn didn't stop, she escalated. Saturday morning, the invasion began in earnest, a convoy of 3 black SUVs rolling down my gravel drive like a presidential motorcade, carrying Evelyn, Preston, and a legal team that looked like they charged by the breath. Preston looked exactly like the type of guy who peaked in high school and had been coasting on his mother's credit card ever since, soft around the middle in designer jeans that had never seen a day of work, carrying that nervous, aggressive energy of a coward who knows he is backup. "We're prepared to make you an offer you can't refuse," Evelyn announced, signaling her lead attorney, a woman named Ms. Vance, who slapped a document on my workbench offering $2.5 million for a property I'd bought for a fraction of that, a number that screamed desperation or hidden motives. "I got kids who need a home. Man, stop being selfish," Preston whined, his voice grating, and when I refused again, telling them my brother's piece wasn't for sale, Evelyn dropped the pretense, her eyes going cold behind those glasses. "We have legal options if you continue to be unreasonable, Mr. Harlan," she hissed, a threat that hung in the humid air long after their taillights faded. The reality of those options hit on Monday when I came home to find Danny standing in the east pasture, staring at a scene of absolute carnage, his hands shaking so hard he couldn't hold his phone. Someone had brought in heavy machinery, not just an ATV this time, but something with hydraulic power, snapping fence posts like toothpicks and severing my main irrigation line in 3 places, turning the pasture into a swamp of mud and wasted water, a deliberate attack on the lifeblood of the ranch. "They came in daylight, Jack," Danny whispered, fighting a panic attack. "Big truck, guy in a baseball cap, just cut it and left." And seeing the fear return to my brother's eyes, the progress of 5 years unraveling in 5 minutes, I felt a rage so cold it burned. They had severed the water, creating an electrocution hazard and threatening the livestock, a felony under state agricultural laws. But they were careful, disabling my trail cameras, tilting them to face the earth so there was no video, just the aftermath. That evening, Preston had the audacity to show up on my porch, feigning concern, wearing brand new work boots, saying, "Hey man, heard you had some vandal trouble. My mom feels terrible. Maybe we can work something out." A performance so transparent it was insulting. He hinted that if I sold, the vandalism would stop, casually mentioning that rural properties close to quality neighborhoods don't stay rural forever. A slip that confirmed this was a campaign of terror designed to make ownership impossible. I called in Mike Dawson, a civil engineer and an old friend who owed me a favor, and together we walked the property line where Preston made his nightly illegal crossings, staring at the irrigation ditch that was now a muddy moat thanks to their sabotage. "I need a bridge, Mike," I told him. "But not just any bridge. I need one that follows the laws of physics strictly." Mike grinned, understanding immediately, and we designed a collapsible bridge, a structure that looked solid, sturdy enough for a man on foot or my light farm equipment, but engineered with breakaway joints that would fail catastrophically under the specific weight of Preston's heavy-duty ATV plus his own bulk. It was a trap laid with math, a passive defense system that would only trigger if someone was trespassing with a heavy vehicle. Perfectly legal and poetically just. While the bridge sat waiting, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a phone call from Fort Worth, a woman with a nervous voice named Rebecca, who identified herself as Preston's ex-wife. "He's lying to everyone, Sheriff," she told me, breathless. "He didn't lose custody because of housing. He lost it because of domestic violence and fraud. He has a restraining order. He can't even have overnight visits." The truth poured out. There was no custody hearing requiring my ranch. That was a fabrication. Preston and his mother wanted the land to build a luxury, glamping resort and wedding venue, a commercial development that would make them millions, and they were using the fake for the children narrative to fast-track the legal bullying. "He's done this before," Rebecca warned, sending me documents of a similar scheme in Colorado, proving this was organized racketeering, wire fraud, and abuse of process. Armed with this, I was ready, but Evelyn had one last card to play, showing up on Friday with a new lawyer and a heavy-set man who looked like hired muscle, offering $3.7 million and a threat that if I didn't take it, they would bury me in eminent domain lawsuits, environmental impact studies, and zoning challenges that would bankrupt me. "Generational wealth or generational debt, Mr. Harlan," she sneered. "Family court judges don't like men who put pride before children." They drove away thinking they had crushed me, unaware that they had just confessed to a conspiracy in front of a hidden microphone I was wearing, and that the trap was set for Saturday night, a night that would be very educational for everyone involved. Saturday night settled over Starlight Ridge with a deceptive calm, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting for the lightning strike. I was positioned in the hayloft, watching the green glow of the night vision monitors, while Danny was safe inside the house, and Deputy Cole was staged a mile down the road, waiting for the signal. At 11:47 p.m., the darkness was pierced by headlights, but not just the ATV this time. A utility vehicle rolled up to the property line, carrying Preston and a large man in a baseball cap, the saboteur from the irrigation attack, and through the parabolic microphone, I heard them planning the night's work. "Hit the electrical feed to the barn first," the large man said, his voice carrying clearly. "Make it look like a surge. Your mom's paying a lot for this, Preston, so don't mess it up." It was the smoking gun, an admission of paid sabotage, escalating from harassment to conspiracy to commit felony damage. And as the hired man moved toward my power grid with bolt cutters, Preston climbed onto his ATV, revving the engine, arrogant and eager to cross the irrigation ditch to get a better view of the destruction. "Unit 1 to dispatch," I whispered into my radio, "move in." I watched on the monitor as Preston hit the gas, speeding toward the bridge Mike Dawson and I had built, his headlights cutting through the dark, trusting a structure he had no right to be on. The physics were ruthless. The moment the heavy ATV hit the center span, the breakaway joint snapped with a sound like a gunshot, and the bridge folded instantly, dropping Preston and his machine 8 feet down into the muddy, cold water of the irrigation ditch. The scream was primal, a mix of shock and muddy indignation. "Help! I'm trapped! MOM!" As sirens began to wail in the distance, tearing through the quiet night, floodlights snapped on, illuminating the scene in blinding white. Preston thrashing in the mud, his hired goon freezing near the barn, and me climbing down the ladder, adjusting my duty belt. Evelyn arrived before the dust had even settled, her Range Rover screeching to a halt, followed by her legal team and, deliciously, a news van from Channel 8 she must have tipped off herself, hoping to catch the squatter injuring her son. She stormed out in a silk robe, pointing a manicured finger at Deputy Cole, who was already cuffing the saboteur. "Arrest that man," she shrieked, pointing at me as I emerged from the shadows of the barn. "He set a trap for my son. This is attempted murder. I am the president of the Oakwood Heights HOA, and I demand justice." The reporter, Linda Cross, shoved a microphone toward Evelyn, the camera light blinding, capturing every ounce of her hysteria. "Mrs. St. James," I said, my voice cutting through her screaming, stepping into the light, wearing my full uniform, the star on my chest gleaming. She froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, her eyes darting from my face to the badge, the realization crashing down on her like a collapsing building. "I'm Sheriff Jack Harlan," I announced, loud enough for the camera and the neighbors gathering at the fence. "And your son is under arrest for criminal trespass, felony vandalism, and conspiracy. And since you organized and financed this little operation against a law enforcement officer, you're coming with him." The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost, stammering. "But we thought you were just nobody. You thought I was someone who couldn't fight back," I corrected her. Then Rebecca stepped out from behind a patrol car, holding the files, telling the camera crew everything. The fake custody battle, the domestic abuse, the plans for a resort. "He doesn't want a home for our kids," Rebecca said, her voice shaking but strong. "He wants a hotel." The fallout was absolute. Preston faced 18 charges. The hired man rolled on Evelyn for a plea deal, and Evelyn herself lost her law license, her HOA presidency, and over $100,000 in settlements to me and Danny. But the money didn't matter. 6 months later, Danny and I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills of Starlight Ridge, the air filled with the sounds of veterans laughing, men and women from our new recovery program, fixing fences, riding horses, finding the peace that Danny had found. We'd turned the land they tried to steal into a sanctuary for soldiers who had lost their way, a fortress of healing that no HOA president could ever touch. As I took a sip of coffee, watching the fireflies dance over the repaired irrigation ditch, I looked at Danny, smiling for real, and I wondered about the nature of justice. We won, and the bad guys lost, but they only lost because I had a badge and the resources to fight back. It keeps me up at night thinking about the people who don't have a star on their chest, who face the Evelyns of the world alone. Is justice truly blind, or does it only see you when you have the power to force it to look?